Hello, everybody. My name is Anushuya, and I am Bay Nature's Journalism Fellow. And I'm so excited to welcome you today to this Bay Nature talk on bears, black bears in the Bay. I encourage you to turn your cameras on for this hour. It would be great to see everyone's faces. But please keep your mic muted unless you are asking a question. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce Bay Nature magazine. Bay Nature is a quarterly print publication based in Berkeley, California, that focuses on nature and conservation topics in the Bay. We publish a print magazine. In addition to our print magazine, we also publish weekly digital-only content and host a number of in-person events like hikes and online events like talks such as this one or other online meetings. If you're interested in receiving free access to all of our hikes and as well as online talks and online events, you should become a Bay Nature member. I encourage you to, and I will be circulating links for our membership program after the event. But without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our presenter for today, Meghan Walla-Murphy. Meghan Walla-Murphy is the lead of the North Bear Bay Collective and is a wildlife ecologist, educator, and author who has tracked animals avidly for more than 2 decades. Meghan also works in habitat connectivity and outreach, striving to better connect people to their external and internal landscapes. Thank you, Meghan, for joining us today. I'll invite you on screen to present. As you listen, please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and there will be time after Meghan's presentation where we'll go over the questions with her. Please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Anushuya and Bay Nature for having me. And thank you all for joining in the middle of your day. I appreciate it. Welcome to my office. I'm in downtown Occidental in West Sonoma County, about 5 to 10 miles from the ocean, depending on how the crow chooses to fly. And when I first moved back here in 2012, there was like maybe the occasional bear wandering through. And in the last 12 years that I've lived here, it's astounding how many bears there are. So, and that have moved into Sonoma County. So I'm just going to share my screen and give you a little preamble on bears. And then my understanding is we're just going to open it up to conversation and questions, which I love. So much more fun that way. Great. I just want to make sure, can you all see my screen? You can just give me a thumbs up or yes. Okay, great. I'd like to start with this slide. This was a slide that I took, excuse me, in Yellowstone National Park. It was like 4:30 in the morning on a really beautiful summer day. And this mama bear, she actually plopped down quite close to the road. So I got to watch her really close, maybe about 50 feet away. And she was playing with her cubs. And then all of a sudden she plopped down and these 2 little baby cubs just ran up her belly and started nursing. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And as young siblings will do, they kind of start getting irritated with each other and maybe more interested in fighting with each other than nursing. And mom was sitting there and you could hear her kind of growling at them to like knock it off because they were tussling. And she growled again and they kind of calmed down. And then they got kind of rowdy again while they were suckling. And one of them must have bitten her or something because the mom yelped. And with that, she stood up and the cubs just rolled down the hill. And I was watching, I was like, oh, she's a good mother and she has good boundaries. And I like to start with that story because I think bears really beg humans to have good boundaries and to, make sure that where our homes are, we're protected, we have good boundaries, not inviting food and bears in or bears to think our homes are food. But they also are really communicative and let us know when we have gone too far. So bears are great that way. Let me get on to my, before we get too far, I always like to thank the land and the water and the people who have taught me so much. I've spent over 2.5 decades, really deeply tracking wildlife and being in relationship with lots of different people in different countries, and feels really important to me to honor the legacy that's coming behind me. You know, what I get to share with you is just such a small percentage of what I've gotten to discover on my own. And there's all these people standing behind me. So just a little nod to our teachers, including the non-human teachers that we all get to learn from. So I like to start with bears and humans. So if you have ancestry in the Northern Hemisphere, likely someone in your legacy had a relationship with bears. The more that I have gone deep into bears and looking at all sides of them, I start to see this intertwining of bears and humans. And many, many, many of the cultures that I look at, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, believe that bears taught humans what to eat, what medicines to use, and how to live in the cold. So hopefully you've gotten enough time to read this quote. It's a beautiful book, Giving Voice to Bear. I really encourage you to read it. It's about North American indigenous people and their relationship with bears. So as I said, bears have been teaching humans for a long time. In the top left, you'll see a beautiful black bear up in like Humboldt County digging for roots. And over on the right is a young Yurok woman also digging for roots. This is called bear root, and it's a big medicine. OSHA is one of them that you're called. It's really good lung medicine and healing, and also spiritual medicine. You know, and that intertwining of bears and humans goes far beyond just learning the practicalities of living in the Northern Hemisphere, but we have so many stories and tales about bears, even to the constellations that are in our sky. And our language comes from that. Like that sound, it comes from this sound of many indigenous languages that the bears made. There's another really beautiful book called The Sacred Paw that talks all about the indigenous languages and our current English language and the relationship that it has with bears. It will stagger you. You know, and again, bears have been celebrated, but also have been places of initiation and ceremony. This is a painting from, I believe it's Great Britain, about the bears dancing and celebrating. But there's also in North America these deep, deep rituals and dances that are celebrated for bears and are still going on. The top left is a bronze statue. It's of the Chumash bear dance, of which I've been honored and invited to go to, and they're amazing. The middle is a mask of the Haida, and also in a bear dance. And on the right, the polar bears are even dancing. So Inuit polar bear dances exist today too. Okay, and as I said, I'm just giving you examples. Here we are over in what we now call Japan, and the indigenous people and their bear celebrations. And here, and besides just Great Britain, you know, there's Ireland, who has a really deep relationship with bears, but also all over the Scandinavian countries, the Carpathian Mountains, and into now what we call Russia. So if you're not like, oh yeah, bears and humans, but I just want to know the biology and why they're so cool, there's something that I love, the anadromous nutrient cycle. Anadromous meaning born in freshwater, going out to saltwater and returning to freshwater. So if you love salmon, you would love the anadromous nutrient cycle, and the bears are intertwined really deeply with that, as they are with the forest. So we have the salmon, the water, the bears, and the trees all in interrelationship. And ecologically speaking, it's a productive area when you have all of those forces together. So just to get a little more detail about the anadromous nutrient cycle, this is an example that happens up in Tahoe. I have not seen it on the Pacific coast because really the only places where it's still very prevalent is up in Alaska. But in Lake Tahoe, well, they now have the Saucony salmon or sockeye salmon. I'm sorry, the kokanee salmon or the sockeye salmon, which are not native, but were planted in Tahoe Lake. But they do act as the indigenous Lahontan cutthroat trout did. And they come up into the tributaries and they spawn in hundreds, will come up in there. And the bears, you can see they will, well, I'll show you pictures in a minute, but that sockeye is there to to breed, and they're kind of preoccupied with courting and digging nests and mating and all of that such. So the bears will just come in and it's a free-for-all and they'll grab them. And on that top left picture is the eggs that have been spilt out of one of the female salmon, and the bears love that. The bottom right doesn't have a lot, well, bears and beaver go together, but I just had to give a little nod to beaver because they're all over that area too. But the bears then come in and they grab as many salmon as they can. And they often only eat the heads because for bears, when you have such an abundance of food, that is the most nutritious, fatty part. And they'll often leave the rest of the carcasses around. And this is where the nutrient cycle comes in. So bears are going into the rivers, pulling the salmon out and leaving these carcasses all over the forest, which brings in the osprey, the eagles, the foxes, the coyotes, the weasels. Everyone gets to feast off of this anadromous nutrient cycle of which the bears are pulling nutrients out of the river, bringing it into the forest. And then, of course, we have the question, as you can see in this bottom left picture, do bears poop in the woods? Of course they do. And they'll often go far, far out from these creeks and rivers that have the salmon. So not only are they pulling nutrients out from the river as they scatter and go, they're taking those fish nutrients and scattering it into the forest, sometimes, you know, a mile or two away from the water systems. And that's where the forest piece comes in, is that those marine isotopes and nutrients are actually found in the trees growing in the forest. Trees have been cored. And so you get the marine isotopes coming from the salmon, from the ocean. In this case, the sockeye salmon are bringing in nutrients from the lake out into the forest. And then it goes into the soil. So there's a really healthy soil relationship too. And I'm sleeping in a little bear bed right next to the creek because the bears just feast, they sleep, they feast, they sleep, and they also mark. So this bottom left picture is a bear bite on an aspen, and up on the top right is a bear clawing the aspen. Oops. So let's talk about bears in California and the Bay Area. So this top left picture is of grizzlies. So predominantly, California was a grizzly bear state. We had some black bears. They were in the northwest part of the state, like Humboldt, Mendocino, Del Norte counties, and then in the Sierras. But for the most part, the rest of California was mainly grizzly, with the occasional smattering of black bears here and there. With the extirpation of grizzlies, so we're now looking at the 100-year anniversary this year, 2024. With the extirpation of grizzlies, there was a time in California where there were no bears. So often I'll talk to old timers around the Bay Area and they're like, no, there's not bears in the Bay Area. Well, it's because there's generation or two that have grown up without grizzlies and before the black bears have started to move into these new areas. So now in California, the only bear you get to see is what we call a black bear, Ursus americanus. So all these pictures are of black bears. Black bears are not necessarily black. They can be brown and cinnamon and blonde. There's even like a bluish colored black bear. But here's just a little nod to the grizzlies and their historic range. And as I said, 1924 in California was the last known grizzly. There's probably some hidden out far, but they certainly stopped reproducing around then too. And the only place we get to see grizzlies now is really on the state flag, which is just so ironic. Maybe they'll come back in my lifetime. Wouldn't that be lovely? But with that extirpation of the grizzlies, maybe you've heard the quote, nature abhors a vacuum. So black bears have started to move into areas, and though Department of Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife has not done a statewide recent population survey in individual counties that they're looking at, and certainly in 2016, they saw that population continue to grow. And when I talk to the state biologists I get to work with, they believe that these numbers are actually grossly underestimated, that there's probably closer to 55 to 65,000 black bear in California right now. So the bears are on the move. Here's a little historic range of black bears. You can see the red, but this is way old map. Here's a much more recent map showing their range. And It doesn't even include Point Reyes, but we do know that there are bears in Point Reyes right now. And certainly they are moving all around and kind of surrounding the bay and all around here. So good to see. And Rick Lanneman, who is becoming a colleague and friend of mine, he just sent me this information of a bear that was caught on a wildlife camera in May, right over just to the east of 101, and kind of towards Gilroy. You can see the map. So just to let you know, they're on the move and their sightings are becoming the norm. I love to add this quote. I'll give you a second to read it. This is from a dear friend who's a neighbor. And this is from 2013. And the thing I really love about this quote is that our fridges, freezers, and gardens are part of the bear's larger ecosystem. And just to understand, there's a lot more of these relationships we need to understand in the bigger forces of bears. So this quote is just so impactful for me because it helps to understand the bears are not seeing your home as separate from their ecosystem. You are part of a bear's ecosystem. I am part of a bear's ecosystem, and we are of theirs. And so how do we kind of figure out a way to live with the bears in a good way where we're both staying healthy? And as I said, bear sightings are the norm all over the North Bay, certainly, and starting kind of to wrap around into Solano counties. I wouldn't be surprised if the East Bay is going to start getting some bears sooner than later as well. Which spawned the creation of what is called the North Bay Bear Collaborative. I'm one of many leads on the collaborative, and we are truly a collaborative. But in I think it was it was end of 2016, beginning of 2017, a small group of us got together because the first bear cubs had been sighted on a wildlife camera in Sugarloaf State Park. And that led us to be like, oh, the bears are now reproducing here, not just moving through. So we want to really address this before we recreate a system like is happening in Yosemite or in Tahoe. And Breck Parkman, who has now retired from being the California State archaeologist, he asked the question, how do we build a bear culture in the North Bay? And that has been basically our mission and our leading question that's leading to many different projects that we're now working on. We are not a nonprofit. We are not a legal corporation. We are truly a collaborative of many, many different organizations coming together. We have 3 different tribal entities. We have a handful of nonprofits, CDFW, state parks, national parks, UC Davis. We have at least 60 volunteers. And, you know, a lot of youth are part of this project as well. And it feels really good to know that there's a legacy coming behind us. So we get together and we like to tell a lot of bear stories. It's how we start our meetings. Who's learning what, when. We have a DNA research project, which I'll get into in a minute. We're doing a lot of tracking and mapping, and really probably the thing I spend most of my time on is education. People are always like, oh, you get to work with bears. But the reality is I get to work with people so that we can all live with bears and figure that out. So I'm hoping you will share this information that you learned today and really get the word out, because that is going to be what helps us all the most. As I said, we already have 3 different tribal entities. We are now in year 3 with the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center on a grant-led project working with Sonoma County Regional Parks. And we're also in year 3 working with the Kashaya tribe. And through these 2 different grants and 2 different programs, students are learning how to identify bear food and doing vegetation transects. They're setting up wildlife cameras. We're doing DNA connection from scat. And then what I really love about it is they get to work with elders within their tribe and the indigenous community of the North Bay to learn about how did they live with bears. And granted, it was largely grizzly bears, but they're still telling the stories, and a lot of this information is transcending, and they're learning historical bear basket weaving patterns and how was the landscape tended and what did the bears eat. So we're excited about these programs. So I'm so thankful that I get to participate. As I said, we have a DNA project. We are now in year 5 of collecting. We can only collect in the summer months, so we usually start right about now, May and June. Actually, I guess we're in the middle of July now, so we're not even there. But and we go through into October till the first rains. And we are collecting all over Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties to understand individuals, relationship between individuals, diet preferences, and dispersal. So we just recently got, in our last batch from 2024, we found out that one of the bears that has shown up in Marin County actually started in Sugarloaf and the Mayacamas in Sonoma County. We have other bears from northern Sonoma County moving down to southern Sonoma County, and we're really looking at where are those corridors, and how can we protect them and protect people, and looking at that interface between humans and bears and that relationship as well. So, what do we get to do to live with bears? That is really the biggest challenge. I sometimes very cheekily say, oh, the bear nami is coming, folks. There is a wave of bears. And right now we see the numbers keep going up and up. This is a novel thing. Black bears were not in a lot of the areas that we are now researching and looking at, but we are learning from a lot of other places that live with bears. How do we get to live with bears, and what's our best strategy, especially because there is an enormous population of humans in the North Bay, as we all know. We're all sitting here and living. So as far as living with bears, and we can get into a lot of the details, I didn't want to talk at you too much. I was more interested in discussion. The best thing that you can do is to keep, like I started with boundaries, is have all of your food and your waste really tight. Don't let the bears associate your home as a source of food. As soon as a bear kind of makes that relationship, it's very hard to unteach that bear that your place is not a source of food. It's easy to teach a bear. It's hard to make a bear forget, is one of the sayings that's out there. So as soon as they're kind of associating you with that food, they're going to keep checking and checking and checking. And the other piece, like as I said, is to really please share the information, get it out there, because that will keep the bears and ourselves safe. So it was just a quick little entry. Below is my website. You're welcome to reach out to me personally with questions. And then the North Bay Bear Collaborative, we have a beingwithbears.org website. There's a little bit of information there, but what I'd also like to offer, which I should have put on this slide, is two other really great resources. They are bearsmart.com and bearwise.org. And both of those websites have like schematics for bear-proof composting. How do you deal with apiaries? What do you do with your orchards? And I'm very happy to share all that with you, but those are two really great websites. So that I will stop my share and let's open it up into conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, first of all, Megan. That was an amazing presentation. Very cool to learn about the history of bears in the Bay, and just getting to know more about them. I'll open up with one kind of curiosity that I was having is, how in our summer issue of the magazine, we talk about how these bears are occupying this ecological niche that was, occupied by grizzlies in the past. And I was wondering, like, are there kind of differences or comparisons we can make ecologically when it comes to grizzlies versus black bears?
Yeah, that's a great question. So grizzlies, the reason why California had had a lot of grizzlies was because grizzlies are an animal of open grasslands and oak woodlands and big plains. And California had a lot of oak woodlands and way more coastal prairie than we see today, and a lot of grasslands, including like the Central Valley and all of these, grass-covered hills. And so if you ever look at paws of a grizzly versus a black bear, grizzlies have very long claws because they were predominantly diggers. They were digging up all kinds of different foods, while black bears are bears of the forest, which is why they were mostly in the Sierras and up in that northwest place. And so what was happening, so bears now, part of the reason people believe that the black bears are dispersing into other areas is because we have suppressed fire. So our forests are growing up and we're having less grasslands and more forests. So black bears are coming into that area for that. Nonetheless, black bears are still diggers. They still can make wallows and they'll make watering holes for things. They are, and both bears are exceptional at seed distribution. So, and seed dispersal. So bears are great at spreading seed, and they are one of the biggest spreaders of native seed and foods. And they both also participate in the anadromous nutrient cycle, which is great. Get those fish away and around.
That's awesome. That's
Fish
awesome.
in. Yeah.
Okay, for our first audience question, we have one from Bill Lycum, I believe. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question yourself, that'd be awesome. Bill, if you're here.
Yeah, off and on you hear about stories of bears in the Santa Cruz Mountains. All the way, I grew up over there in the Santa Cruz area. And from the time I was growing up over there in the 50s, there were reports of bears around Corralitos and around in that area there. Nobody ever took a picture of them though, because back in those days, the cameras weren't as available as they are today. What do you know about the presence or absence of bears in the Santa Cruz Mountains?
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically just what you were saying, Jim, or I'm sorry, Bill, is that you get a sighting every now and then, likely a male dispersing, looking for food. The most steady populations that I know of in that area, and I'm happy for the audience to pick up in other places, are coming up from the Santa Lucia Mountains in Monterey Bay. And they're in they'll come into Carmel every now and then. But there haven't been that many that have made it, from the lower part of the bay up into the Santa Cruz Mountains. I think, how they're going to get through the gauntlet of going around and through the East Bay. Perhaps that's how it will come, is that they'll start moving down through Solano County, around the East Bay and over. As I did show you, Rick had showed that picture of that bear in May, certainly way east of the mountains, but they show up every now and then. I don't think that as far as I know, there's not a reproducing population there.
Okay, thank you.
So much. I'd also like to invite you, Schultz, to ask your question. I see you raise your hand if you want to unmute.
I'm here. Hi, this is Ursula. And being that I'm called Ursula, I thought I had some kind of relationship with bears, but it turns out I'm always being terrified by them, so maybe not so much. But we are all of a sudden having an influx of bears in our Mendocino County vegetable garden, and particularly breaking branches and climbing over. So there's a new female who's very slender but tall, who has 3 cubs. So I think she's starving, and she's going around. I've seen pictures of her sucking bird seed out of bird feeders. But now what's happening is twice we've caught them on our property, and the dog barks, and so I have a concern about the dog. And then she disappears for a long time, but I can hear her walking in the canyon. So she goes down the canyons, up and down the canyons. But then you get up and you've heard nothing, and there's all these tiny little cute bird, bear poops. So the cubs are in there full of manzanita berries in a fenced garden. So we're considering doing electric fencing. But she has the idea that we have stuff because she's broken down the door for our garden shed and guzzled fish emulsions, and she'd shoot off a corner of Citrusol, which I think is probably not good for her. And she treks everywhere. She's being sighted all over everybody's property for a pretty big range. And I was told the range is 10,000 acres for a bear. Is that true?
Oh, well, that would be enormous, and it completely depends on where the bear is. So in Arizona,
Anyway,
some ranges are going to be huge. In Alaska during fish season, they're going to be really small. So
So the thing is, we've heard all this stuff like you should have her trapped. Well, I think trapped bears don't do very well, and I think they probably might get killed. That was one suggestion. And then I've heard just put a tape around your garden at nose level and ground level. Electric.
Mhm.
So that's a thought. I'm just not, I want the bears to be happy, but I don't want them to be just totally smashing my fruit trees, which is what's happening now.
Yeah, so you're
Right.
lucky because you get to live in Mendocino and Humboldt counties, which have the highest bear density almost of anywhere in the lower 48. So Mendocino has a lot of bears. And electric fencing is remarkably effective for bears. And nose level is great because their noses are very, very sensitive. Their palms of their forepaws and their back paws are bare, literally bare paws. And so they're very, very sensitive and don't like to touch them. So I was going to say electric fencing is great. Dogs are actually really effective. Bears typically, I mean, there might be some odd story out there about a bear attacking a dog, but typically they don't. Obviously, the larger the dog, the more effective it is for pushing that bear off. And then, so this is the thing, please, and this is for everybody. It is really important that we haze the bears and you become a bear deterrent. So if you see her or her cubs, like go out there banging pots, squirt her with a hose. There are places that use like paint guns and rubber bullets. Like that is a very standard practice. And everyone's like, well, I don't want to hurt the bear. You're not going to hurt the bear. Like I have watched bears fall like 20 feet from a tree and like get up and shake off and just walk away. They're extraordinary. Those bear cubs will bounce. They are phenomenal. So using, obviously non-lethal things is not going to hurt the bear, and I really encourage it. Because it's like I said, as soon as they start to get comfortable with you, that's when it becomes a challenge. And for where you are, getting your neighbors involved is going to be really important.
Right. Okay. So one of the reasons I was asking about the fencing at nose level, I'm not sure what nose level is for 3 cubs and an adult. And somebody
Yeah,
said,
I would put up probably 3 strands.
okay,
So
3 strands. Okay.
yeah, and you can go to bearsmart.org and bearwise.com, and they'll even have all the schematics for you.
Right. I can't decide whether we should get strands or tape or wire. Is there any
I
preference?
would go there because I don't
Okay.
know if there's a
All right.
significant difference
Okay,
between it.
well, so the other thing is I've stopped putting compost in the compost pile, and I'm not using chicken manure anymore right now because they seem to, well, I'm just worried they'll like it. So do you think if I was to have a compost pile, it should be within the electrified area? It sounds
Yeah.
like, and maybe I should electrify the shed, which we put a really strong door on, but she pried it open with her claw.
Yeah, you just need to electrify it for now.
Okay, shed.
That may, as soon as she learns that, you may not have to keep it electrified, but for right now, she's in a probing period. And if she is really hungry for whatever reason is going on, whether she had 3 cubs or adopted one, she's pushing the edges. She's pushing boundaries, and what that begs of us is to have good boundaries right back.
Well, the reason I asked the 10,000 acre thing is now we have 4 bears, not just her. So I'm just wondering how much more reproduction is going to happen in our area. I would think a lot. That would just be my impression.
Totally, it depends on how many males there are. It could be all females in a sister-daughter group, a mother-daughter-sister group that's happening. And in that case, it probably won't go up. There will reach a capacity of pushing each other out.
Okay.
Bears are moving by where their food systems are.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes. For our next question, there's one from Evan. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hello. And Ursula, I am so envious that you get those bears, but also I understand it must be frightening and annoying and all of that too, but fascinating. Thanks for sharing all that. I was just curious if there's any chance or talk of reintroducing grizzlies to California, or is that just off the table and hoping it doesn't happen? Where's that at?
Yeah, so I'm going to really encourage you to look up the California Grizzly Project. A colleague and friend of mine is working on that. He's a professor out at UC Santa Barbara, and his name just went, oh, Peter Algona. He's written some great books. And that right now, it's what he started his project on was just really looking at the historical ecology of the California grizzly and going really in depth and doing a bunch of research on grizzlies. And now the question is it even feasible? Will it happen? Could the grizzlies, as wolves did, self reintroduce? So it's out there floating in the ether. Doubtful that it's going to happen anytime soon. And when I say soon, I'm meaning like 30 years, well, maybe 10, 15 years. It's a long process to get an animal reintroduced.
Thanks.
But yeah, it's out there.
Good question.
For sure.
Thank you for your
And it's
question.
exciting.
Rick, if you would like to unmute and ask your question as well, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
hey, Megan. That
Yeah,
photo of the black, great talk, by the way. Thanks for doing this. The black bear photo was, at Pacheco Pass was the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. And I just wanted to tag on to Bill Lycom's question. About every 3 to 5 years, we get another bear dispersing into the Santa Cruz Mountains. I talked to the CDFW unit biologist in Monterey County, who's fantastic. I'm blanking on his name in the moment, but I think the furthest north breeding black bears in the Central Coast are the northern Santa Lucias, as Megan said, near Monterey and Salinas. But we keep getting dispersals, as you saw. Pacheco Pass, a sow and cub in 1978 were tranquilized in Los Gatos. Thought to be making a big dispersal because of a wildfire, probably in the northern Santa Lucia range. But my question has to do, Megan, with Highway 101. Is this a barrier to bears? Have you had bear vehicle accidents, which I think would be pretty terrible, given the size of bears?
Yeah, so 101 is an absolute barrier. They often over in San Luis Obispo, I'm blanking on the name of the grade when you're going from north to south, there's a big grade. They often pick up bears and bear collisions there. Even down near LA, there's black bears over in the Santa Susana area and Simi Valley trying to move over into the Coast Range to the Santa Monica Mountains. There's been collisions there. And according to CDFW, the number one mortality issue for bears is car collision. So 101 is pretty significant.
How about in Marin?
Not yet that I've heard of.
Can you
And so, and this is a great question, is we don't know how they're moving across. This year for our DNA project, we're actually going to be sampling in some places that we think they're moving east-west, but we don't know yet where they are. What I didn't talk about was CDFW will be starting a collaring project in the next, well, it was supposed to start last spring, but due to kind of, all kinds of different things that happens when you're working in a large organization, they haven't started collaring yet, so stay tuned. But they're hoping to collar at least 20 bears within the North Bay, and we'll start to see, hopefully, how are they getting across the 101.
So they're crossing 101 in Marin, but
Well,
it's
that's because especially that bear came from Sugarloaf all the way to Point Reyes. So somehow it got across 101. We don't know if it went under or over. Not sure.
somebody putting trail cams on some of the streams that go under 101.
Yep, we have cameras, and then we also have mapping. Like we have a bunch of the ranchers that live, I suspect it's somewhere near the San Antonio Pass or San Antonio Creek area. Not sure. But that's kind of what we're thinking right now. So we're going to be doing DNA collection down there this year to see where, if that is indeed one of the areas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For your question, that was great. And then for one question from Jolene, if you'd like to unmute. Or it was more of a comment, I can relay that too. All right, I'm not so sure that Jolene's here, so I'll just pass along. They said, they were talking about urban food recycling and how it seems like our urban food recycling cans might become attractions for bears. And so I wanted to ask, if you'd like to
Are you talking about like the composting trash cans that go out? Is that what?
yeah,
Yeah.
and just in general thinking about boundaries between human animal coexistence.
Yeah, really the biggest challenge for bears and getting in trouble is when they're going to find trash and get into trash, and that's why they become habituated. And as Ursula was asking, trapping the bears. So I'll get to the question, but let me address the trapping of bears. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife has a policy of very, very rarely to never relocating bears any longer. It's really ineffective. A bear will travel hundreds of miles to get back to its home range because they are so deeply dependent on what they've learned from their mothers about what food is. Bear mothers are really good mothers. They spend almost just short of 2 years teaching bears what to eat, where they are born. So they have this deep sense of place. So a bear will try and get back to their home range. Also, in getting back to their home range, they are often killed by cars, or they starve to death, or they have been moved into another bear range that has another large bear, and they'll be killed by another large male bear. So the relocation project doesn't really work. And right now, CDFW's policy is if you have a bear that is coming into your place, you have to demonstrate 3 separate times that you have taken the initiative to reduce the attractants that are bringing that bear towards you before they're going to take action. And that is a new bear management strategy that's, I don't know, maybe a year old, maybe a year and a half, somewhere in there. It's pretty new. Considering that it used to be much easier to get a depredation permit, but that has changed in the last year. So it's beholden to us to change our behavior. So the question with the recycling is or the food recycling and the trash question is, we really need to start putting pressure in high bear areas on our waste companies. So here, Ecological, we've been in conversation with them. Sonoma County Regional Parks is now piloting a test to find out which dumpsters are best in campgrounds for bear proofing, because it's crazy, but these cans are exceptionally expensive, like tens of thousands of dollars for one dumpster, bear-proof dumpster. So rightfully so, the waste companies are reluctant to flip over and change all of their waste receptacles. So it's happening slowly, but that's really going to be one of the best things, and that would include the food recycling program. And how do we get those cans bear-proofed?
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I see like a kind of related tangential question from Patricia, if you'd like to unmute and ask. But I think it's pretty, or if you feel like it's been covered, that's all right too.
It's a great program, Megan. Thank you. That has been covered, but in general, I'm thinking the whole sort of eco awareness in our local culture, where people are growing food in their gardens here. I'm in the East Bay. It's very dense. It's urban, but people are growing food and putting up fruit trees and have bird feeders. I mean, it seems like we're on maybe a collision course. I'm not sure how to even imagine doing all of that differently. It sounds like a huge project.
It is a huge project. I have job security for sure. But it can be done because there's lots and lots and lots of places around the world that are living with high densities of bears and doing it pretty effectively. And that's not to say that there isn't the occasional bear that's going to push the edges and be euthanized, or whatever that county or state's regulations are. But what we're really talking about is a shift of what does it look like to live in an ecosystem that has its full suite of wildlife that will help in ways that we can't imagine, right? And so when I was living in the Northeast in Vermont and working up there, they have a lot of bears and a lot of people who are also farmers. It's a big farming community. It's also a very liberal community. So they have composting and honey and orchards and cows and all of those things. And one of the things that I was part of is that there were town hall meetings every spring, and it would remind people like, okay, the bears are going to start becoming more active now, and they were hibernating. Our coastal bears don't hibernate. They take long naps, but they're certainly quieter in the winter. But you'd have these town hall meetings, and they would say, you know, you got to bring your bird feeders in, put them back out in winter. It's time to like turn the electric tape back on. It's time to pay attention to your behavior. And that was just a given. If living with bears, that's what you do. Those two websites that I referred to, there are like bear smart communities or bear wise communities where people in neighborhoods have agreed, like, this is our responsibility. Because it really can go sideways very, very quickly, as we're seeing in Tahoe. I mean, and I say very quickly, that is many years of buildup that wasn't addressed for whatever reason. And we're seeing the effects of that. So the North Bay Bear Collaborative is really hoping that we can get ahead of it. So that, and that was the premise of like building a bear culture, was like, oh, we are a bear culture. We live with bears. We know what to do with bears. And our hope is that, like, you know, the elementary school kids that are coming up behind me, they just take it for granted that you don't take your trash out before it gets picked up. You don't leave it out overnight. You take your, you know, your bird feeders down in the summer. You have, you know, your orchards might have electric tape on them only when there's fruit, right? If there's no fruit, there's no bears there. They've moved on to the acorns. The other opportunity, and this is, I'm actually giving a talk for the Marin Conservation League tomorrow, and it's about, I think bears are this amazing opportunity for land stewardship and land tending. Right now, we have all this open space in California, but it's largely untouched or untended or not interacted with. And so we're seeing an overgrowth of our conifers. And when you have these conifer encroachments, you see a decrease in food, right? And that's not just for the bears, that's for deer and elk and foxes and whomever is eating more than just deer, right? And so we have this opportunity to work in partnerships with the state parks and national parks and nonprofits to go out there and be like, hey, we need to really tend this landscape. And as I said, working with tribes, putting fire back on the ground, it really helps to bring a flush of diversity. And the more diverse food sources that we have that range large seasons in our wild spaces, the more likely the bears are going to stay there rather than coming and looking for human sources of food. So you know, my long-term vision, like, that's what we get to do, is really steward these wild spaces so the bears are happy and have better, healthier calories than our trash.
Great. Thank you so much for your question, and thank you for answering, Megan. I'll just take the time to ask our sort of last one as we're winding down. But I'm really curious how we and other folks on the call or people we know can get involved with you know, volunteering the work that you're doing with North Bay Bear Collaborative, or just opportunities for us to maybe proactively think about what we can do regarding bears.
Yeah, so I'd say number one is to really just take care of where you live as best you can, right? So as Ursula was saying, is like, oh, I'm going to take responsibility for this because I do live with bears. And then sharing that knowledge within your neighborhood is really important. The other thing I would say, and I wanted to address this, is there's a lot of fear around bears, right? And I get it. They're big and they have claws and they have big teeth, and the media is just pushing this like bear attack, bear attack, bear attack thing. But when we think about how many bears there are and how many humans there are and truly how many bear attacks there are, it's really quite small. Like you're certainly in more danger driving to your local grocery store than you are of being attacked by a bear, right? Cars are the number one most dangerous thing that I know of on the planet. So there's that piece, but I've also had dozens and dozens and dozens of encounters with bears and have never even felt remotely like my life was at risk, right? typically our bears, especially black bears, are these scaredy bears, is what my mentor, who's a carnivore biologist from Yellowstone, he used to say. He's like, and he's right, like I've been sitting quietly doing some kind of vegetation survey, and I can hear the bear coming at me, and I'm just sitting quiet, and the bear will peek its head up and see me, and the first response, like 90% of the time, is like they jump, they turn around in midair, they run, and they go about 50 feet, and then they stop to look behind them to be like, are you following me? Am I gonna get like chased by you? And then they pretend like they're all cool, and then they saunter away. That is typically a response unless they have cited you as a source of food. So back to our original thing of taking care of that. So that's the first thing to get involved. If you want to become involved with the Bear Collaborative, we do have volunteers who are learning how to track bears and going out and collecting scat for our DNA project. We are in our season right now. You can actually, you'll probably have to reach out to me because I'll send out a sign-up sheet if you're interested in collecting scat. We have formalized transects, but then we also have what we cheekily call the emergency scat responder team. And that's if somebody finds a scat in a weird place, like Rick, if you find a bear scat in Santa Cruz, we want you to collect it, and we will send that off to UC Davis for analysis, like to find out who this bear is and where does it come from. So we are looking for people who are willing to drive close by and pick the scat up and take it. Pepperwood Preserve is where our scat samples are collected before they go to UC Davis. So that's another way. Also, you know, I have weekly, I probably get half a dozen pictures of bears in different areas. So we are trying to keep track. Those are all data points on a map. So it is more anecdotal than a strict research project, but we are starting to get the range of where the bears are and looking for hotspots where there might be a lot of bear-human interaction. So, oh, somebody, I think it was Peter, just said he's part of the Marin MBBC Bear Collaborative, and he has been a great support, and he's collected lots of scat for us. Thank you, Peter.
That's awesome. So
yeah.
glad to have you all here on this call. Well, thank you. And thank you all for coming to our lovely Bear Talk. It's been a great hour spending time with you, Megan, and with everyone here. If you all are interested in continuing the conversation, Bay Nature is actually going to be going on a bear-related hike with Megan sometime soon. So watch your email and our newsletter for an outing with Megan sometime this October. We're looking forward to that.
Thank you all. Feel free to reach out, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.